Welcome to I Said What I Said, a sports podcast giving you opinions not heard anywhere else. I'm your host, Brad Wakai, alongside my co-host, Tyson Gentry. Tyson, big show today because as we're recording this, it was franchise tag day. So it was the deadline. We know who's receiving the franchise tags. Some other people have gotten cut. So we're going to talk about that. Best free agents. We're going to go through the early list here. Free agents can start signing officially on March 13th, but the legal tampering period, as we just discussed and found out, starts on March 11th at noon Eastern. So you're going to hear some BS, but nothing can officially get done until March 13th. So let's go through franchise tag day. It was very interesting to me who got tagged and who didn't. Josh Allen of the Jags, Brian Burns from the Panthers, Kyle Duggar in a transitional tag, the safety from the Patriots, which is the most interesting one. T. Higgins, wideout for the Bengals. Jalen Johnson, the cornerback for the Bears. Justin Matabuke, defensive tackle for the Ravens. Michael Pittman, wideout for the Colts. L'Jarius Sneed, corner for the Chiefs. And then Antoine Winfield, the safety for the Bucks. Honestly, not as many as I thought, but what did you think about this when you saw these kind of roll through?
Well, you kind of got to look at them and then you go, okay, that's a franchise tag. That's a tag and trade. And then that's we just don't want you to win this negotiation tag, which some of them end up being. I actually like the use of the transition tag, just like the Patriots did. They're kind of the kings of it. Belichick kind of put that, to the forefront of everyone's brain, but it kind of lets you go out on the open market, and most of the time they're going to find out maybe they weren't worth as much as they were asking you specifically. It can bite you in the butt, but it's pretty unlikely. Dude, I think a couple of these, like Brian Burns, I think is probably not going to play another snap for the Carolina Panthers, regardless of the franchise tag. I'm pretty 50-50 on if L'Jarius Sneed is going to play another snap for the Kansas City Chiefs with the franchise tag. And then when you get into the wide receivers, yes, you have to keep Michael Pittman Jr. Like, if you're the Colts, you have to do it with Anthony Richardson coming back. And what will really be his first year, right? We only got a couple games of him, and the T. Higgins is vital to that offense when it's rolling. But that's so much money. Like, you're getting top five money for some of these guys that might not be top five. And, it's important to keep in mind that, yes, they want that long-term deal, but some of them, it's not the worst. It's not the end of the world to get that guaranteed top five contract when you're a fringe top 10.
$21.8 million for the wideouts.
It's a lot.
A lot of money. I'd be surprised to see if T. Higgins, that's another name. I think the Bengals may try to dangle around a little bit and see what they can get in return, because I think there's going to be some buyers if there is a team that doesn't get the receiver that they're looking for. And we just talked about how deep of a receiver class this is in our draft combine discussion that we just had. So I do think there are going to be teams, and maybe that's what the Bengals realize too. They're like, man, this is a pretty good draft. I don't know if anybody's going to be too desperate to try to trade for a T. Higgins, but we'll see, right? But that's something that jumped out to me, and not a lot of people were tagged, Tyson. I think that was something interesting as well. I mean, people are hitting the open market. Like, I think there's going to be a frenzy to sign these players, and noticeably, there was no running backs that got tagged. This is coming off there. Remember, they had their running backs convention or whatever over Zoom, and it was like, we need to figure something out. And Saquon Barkley wasn't
dudes
tagged.
listening to Saquon sing karaoke for an hour and a half. That's all that was. They didn't find anything out.
Yeah, I mean, no Saquon tag, no DeAndre Swift tag, no Austin Eckler tag, Josh Jacobs. Just go through the list. And when I say none, I'm saying none. But it's kind of surprising that some of the names are hitting the open market in this way. What do you think about where we're at with the running backs? So we did a huge dive into it last year, but what are you thinking about this on this update?
Well, I was hearing, I can't remember where it was. I think it was ESPN. I heard somebody say, again, kind of botching this because I suck at details, but that if Saquon Barkley gets $6 or $7 million put in front of him, he better take it because that's going to be the best deal that he gets, which is crazy. It's insane. Whether you believe that Saquon Barkley is still, like, I think he's the hardest one to talk about because half the people, Penn State grads and the like, kind of look at him as the number 2 overall pick. This guy with insane potential and everything else. And then the other side of the coin is it's a dude who's often injured. He's older than the average NFL running back at this point in his career, and we don't know. You'd like to imagine, Christian McCaffrey level resurgence for him. He stays healthy and looks like the man, but it's really hard to tell. Brad, I think they should just do away with franchise tags for running backs in general at this point, because what's the point of tagging a Josh Jacobs and look, Josh Jacobs is a heck of a player. He had a hell of a year on the original franchise tag there. He goes down and Zamir White looks great, right? And so it's over and over again. And these contracts are getting so small that it almost feels, it feels rude to just kind of be like, hey, you're trapped here making half of what you think you're worth and half of what as much as we're going to pay you or play you. But there's no way out. It's a cyclical deal, and these, unfortunately, the guys in the NFL right now aren't going to be the ones to break the cycle.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes, and as we talked about this again, this is not a great running back draft once again. At some point, like I know we're throwing the football around a lot, but running backs, we hinted maybe it could come back at some point. This just has been no indication that it's going to, right? Like we talk about EPA and there's just not a lot of expected points added on giving the ball to your running back for 4 yards. Like you're better off pushing the ball down the field and having an incompletion for an EPA perspective. So I think the more analytics, the more it hurts the running backs. Although both you and I do think there is value to having running backs. It's just not tagging them, paying them as a top 5 salary type of player. Because last year there's a bunch of players who received the franchise tag and it didn't quite go as expected for them.
Sucked. All those teams sucked.
Yeah, so I think when I saw that, this was not shocking. I'll put it that way. Let's move into another one here, Tyson. News in the NFL world. Jason Kelce, the legendary center of the Philadelphia Eagles, has announced his retirement. Honestly, this is such a football story, right? Getting selected as late as he did in the 6th round, being undersized, really not knowing if he's going to be the starting center, and he turns really a Hall of Fame career in with the Eagles. I mean, we're both Eagles fans, so it's sad for us, but this goes beyond just Eagles news. Like he's a figure in the NFL, he's a figure in football, and not having him around is going to be tough.
Yeah, but he became a figure in pop culture over the last year and a half. So
True.
I imagine he'll be doing some sort of like tailgate preview show or something for one of these networks. But yeah, I think we just talked about the franchise tag, and there's not a ton of centers on that list. But you look at center contracts. I think Corey Linsley too. Like a lot of these guys, Alex Mack, but this new generation kind of owes. Hey man, we're getting 2nd round draft capital because of these dudes, because like they made it matter. And so it'll be different without him. And for those of you that hated the tush push, congratulations, because it's not going to run nearly as effectively without Jason Kelce. But, he handpicked Cam Jurgens in the draft last year as the guy that he kind of thought could replace him. But they also tried to replace him with Landon Dickerson, who's now an all-pro guard. They tried to replace him years ago with Isaac Seumalo, who's on his 2nd contract on the new team. So hopefully for the Eagles' sake, it works out. But I think the NFL just, it sucks whenever they lose one of their best players at any position, and it's fairly rare to be, being able to, like, we watched every snap of his career, and you can kind of look at the screen and go, oh, that's actually the best of all time at what he does. It's a pretty cool thing. And I know there's going to be people talking to me about Lynn Dawson or somebody else from the 70s, or I don't give a shit, dude.
That's our guy. Jason Kelce's our guy. Let's move into notable cuts here, Tyson, because there have been some. We haven't talked about it, and today, obviously, with Russell Wilson getting cut, that was a foregone conclusion. I think just cap wise, it had to be done for the Broncos. Rip the Band-Aid off and kind of go from there. But
what do you think about eating the dead cap, though? Is that going to change the way NFL teams kind of approach these big contracts? Because it like you look and you would think Deshaun would be the next one, but it's all fully guaranteed, so it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because what it's more than the previous 2 records combined, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this was such an anomaly, to be completely honest. Like the Watson deal and the Wilson deal, I think were just such anomalies. Like one, what the Broncos traded and then offered him, just they were desperate. They wanted to have it, took a big swing, didn't quite work out. And similar thing with the Browns. I think the deals that they handed out are certainly going to not happen as often in the NFL. Like I think you're going to see more of what Patrick Mahomes signed, more restructuring in terms of what Brady did. So I think we're going to look back on this and be like, oh yeah, we'll never see that again. So it just sucks for the Broncos that they have to eat it, but I mean, this is the right decision for them as an organization.
Yeah, one of the all-time bad trades. He hasn't even
Oof.
made it to the extension part of the contract, right? He played out the last part of his deal that they inherited from the Seattle contract, and then paid out in full the guaranteed money from the other one. And not for nothing, but Russell Wilson's going down as an all-time finesser because he's $111 million total of being paid to not play for teams.
Oof. Yeah, that was certainly something, and so that's getting a lot of the attention, really, the Russ thing, and of course he's a big name, and so he's going to dominate. But the Seattle Seahawks made some interesting moves today of their own when they decided to cut Quandre Diggs, the safety, and the corner, and Jamal Adams, the safety, or both safeties. I guess this is wrong here, but um, I think it's interesting from the Seahawks perspective for them to bring in a defensive guy like Mike McDonald and be like, okay, two of these guys have been staples on the defense. Yeah, we're going to get rid of them. I mean, it makes sense though, right? Like they don't fit McDonald's scheme, and they're going to be expensive to move on. But that was something that jumped out to me.
Yeah, I like it from Seattle's perspective. It's kind of like, let's just rip the Band-Aid and I'm going to start clean, bring in my guys as best as I can because Jamal Adams in name is an all pro. And as much shit as he gets from people like over the last couple of years, we're still talking about him because he's like, for some reason, some sort of cult of personality. What did he go 4 in the draft a long time ago to the Jets, right? And then the trade was 2 first-round picks. Like, this is a guy who's kind of commanded premiums at every stop that he's been at, and he's never quite lived up to the billing. And so I'm interested to see where he lands now because look, he was a pioneer of not necessarily a pioneer, but like that new wave of the box safety.
Mm.
And then turns out he's just a small linebacker, right? And so that kind of limits the things you can do with him. I'm curious to see if there's somebody, if he's willing to accept a smaller role and if somebody's willing to give it to him.
Other notables: Bucks cut their linebacker Shaq Barrett. He had a really good year a few years ago and didn't quite live up to that. The Eagles cut Kevin Byard after trading for him. He's just going to be a cap casualty if he signed or he kept them. So just parted ways there. Patriots made a few cuts: J.C. Jackson, Adrian Phillips, Lawrence Guy. The Vikings move on from Alexander Madison, which I think is very telling.
Ty Chandler,
Dolphins, baby. Yeah, I know. Dolphins, Xavier Howard gone, Emmanuel Ogba gone.
Jerome
Those are
Baker.
2 big names. Yeah, I mean, interesting for sure. And then Eric Kendricks gone from the Chargers, Marquez Valdez-Scantling from the Chiefs. Jags, Darius Williams and Rayshon Jenkins, their defense in their secondary specifically last year was just atrocious. So not surprising to move on there. And then the Bears cutting their center Cody Whitehair, their cornerback Eddie Jackson, and the Falcons moving on from Jonnu Smith, their tight end. And so, honestly, like some big names in the past, but like this is where it is, the not for long league or not for long. And that's what the NFL stands for. Like you could be a big name and they'll move on from you if you cost too much and if your performance doesn't live up to that cap hit.
And one thing to keep in mind, because we'll sit here in 7 months and go, can you believe that they let go of Kevin Byard or another name on that list, right? Because this is the time of year where NFL general managers get to throw their blindfolds on, and start throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And some of these guys are going to be fantastic at their next stops, and some of them can't play anymore. We don't know the difference at this point because there's a reason that they're all on the chopping block. They weren't living up to the contract, and it's pretty crazy to think like the way the NFL cap is structured because you're like, they just cut a good play. Oh, they saved $13 million. And so that part of it's tough. So it's important to keep those things in mind. But before we get off the cuts, Brad, let's just get back to Russell Wilson really fast.
Yeah.
Because he's going to presumably sign for the minimum or close to the minimum. Like you can assign just to be safe, like $5-6 million to it and go down. I didn't think Russell Wilson was necessarily the problem with the Broncos. Like he wasn't as good as he was supposed to be, but I think that if you swap him and Geno Smith, those 2 teams probably have the same records. And I think somebody might get a good football player here. I'm not a Russ guy either.
No, you're not. I'm more of a Russ guy than you. I mean, when you talk about EPA and advanced metrics, he had a bounce back season. It's just a cool and chic thing to do now, just to shit on Russ and be like, oh, he sucks. Like, he could have a great game and be like, oh no. And so I agree with you. I think somebody's going to get a good player on a minimum, a good solid quarterback. Now, 35 years old, not great, but Tyson, NFL.com, this is hilarious to me, has Ryan Tannehill rated above Russell Wilson, has Jacoby Brissett rated above Russell Wilson. Like, I'm sorry. In no world are those two players better than Russell Wilson. And it was a struggle for Russ during his tenure with the Broncos, but my God, what are we doing here?
Well, I think like the list should start with Kirk Cousins and probably end with Kirk Cousins as guys that you can almost like definitively is a weird word to use here with a 40-year-old man coming off of a torn Achilles with Kirk Cousins. Like if you're the Steelers or you're the Falcons or you're, pick a name out of a hat of the teams that need a quarterback, would you rather pay Kirk Cousins $30 million? And we know Kirk gets most of that money, if not all of it, fully guaranteed. This is the original pioneer of these contracts that we're seeing. Or would you pay Russell Wilson $4 million? Right? Is Kirk Cousins 8 times better than Russell Wilson on average? I don't think so, and I think that's the way the NFL teams are going to try to approach it, because when you're buying free agent quarterbacks, it's very unlikely that you're as close to a title as you think you are. And so if he goes to Pittsburgh and they win 9 games again and make the wild card and lose, it's Russell Wilson's fault. He couldn't elevate the team. But like nobody's going to point to the other side and go, "When's the last time a 38 or 35-year-old quarterback jumped ship and won a Super Bowl immediately as a free agent?" Like you got to go back to Peyton for one of those. I guess Tom, but that's, we're talking about the GOAT.
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, what the offense that he's in, the new role, all that good stuff. So let's move into free agents here, Tyson, just like kind of best available. Let's run through this. And we talked about the quarterback a little bit. I mean, number one is Kirk Cousins. I'm surprised that he's still available, to be completely honest. I mean, I guess he can't sign him. I'll put it this way. I was surprised that he at least wasn't thought for a franchise tag. There's like 1 year. Maybe the Vikings go and draft somebody and start developing, because it's not Jaron Hall. That's not the answer. But, that would have been expensive. That would have cost a lot. So I will see if they can get him back for something cheaper. But Baker Mayfield also out there. If you're the Bucs, I think you got to be really careful about bringing him back for as much money as it might cost him. What do you think? What do you think about that too?
Well, I think it's pretty funny. 2 years ago, everybody was in agreement. Maybe this guy can't play anymore, and then he did some fantastic things. Comes in and leads the game-winning drive after being there for 3 days with Sean McVay and the Rams. We all kind of buy back in. He's on the Panthers. He looks okay. Then he goes to the Bucs. They make the playoffs, and they beat the corpse of an Eagles team to win a playoff game. You still won a playoff game. He's 29 right now. Like you're going to pay this guy $40 million going into presumably the back half at least of his athletic prime. There's something to be said about the fact that every teammate seemingly that comes forward about Baker loves having Baker on their team, but this is the slowest Band-Aid ripping I've ever seen by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, I'll be super curious to see what they do there, because Gardner Minshew's available, and like we're not big Gardner
Are we still
guys,
doing
but,
that?
well, you could get him for cheap. I mean, they just gave
know.
Mike Evans a big contract for 2 years. Like, I
52?
don't know, maybe Russ Wilson down there at Tampa. How about that?
That would be funny. Who would you rather have? Who's going to get the bridge starter position this year between Gardner Minshew and Jameis Winston?
Probably Jameis, I think.
Feels weird. Like this is the 4th year in a row we've done this with both these guys.
I know. It is super strange. Let's move into running backs, Tyson. I want to ask you this. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Austin Eckler, J.K. Dobbins, Devin Singletary. Those are the top 8 running backs available in free agency according to NFL.com. If you're a team, could be for 1 year, could be for 3, however you want to sign this. If you're the general manager, which 2 of these guys are you circling saying, let's go after these 2 and let's see if we can get one of them?
Well, I think I'm circling Saquon Barkley just to start. I think that's easy. And then after that, it would kind of probably depend on, what you like. I'm rocking with Derrick Henry. Like I know that Josh Jacobs is probably a better player than him at this point, but I think for a year, give me Derrick Henry on a contender. I'm gonna like my chances a lot more because it can't be J.K. Dobbins. We want it to be, but how many times can this dude get carted to the locker room before we go, okay, maybe this isn't like a sustainable thing? Austin Eckler's on pushing 30. Tony Pollard didn't look like he could play for real to me a year ago. And that was a concern that everybody had, or at least we did going in. DeAndre Swift put up great numbers. Also, there were times where it was like, man, this is why he had to leave Detroit. Like there are different skill sets in this class, and I think Saquon is the only one you can look at and go, oh, if I needed somebody to play 3 downs, he can do it.
Yeah, for me, it's Saquon Barkley is the cream of the crop here, and I'm one of those Penn State guys that Tyson took a shot at that believes that he's still there. But I mean, listen, if he actually played behind an offensive line that was worth anything besides the Giants for the majority of his career, we could be talking about somebody completely different. And he's had a good career so far, and I think maybe in this twilight era, if he's doing like the mercenary thing where he bounces from different team to different team, he can have some good late years. Houston Texans are a huge favorite to sign him in some offshore gambling books. That's interesting to me. I want to keep my eye on that, but I think Josh Jacobs is my second pick here. Only 26 years old. He's 1 year removed from leading the NFL in rushing. And again, the Raiders offensive line, just not a great situation. When things moved away from Josh McDaniels, he looked like he regained that 2022 form a little bit. And so, I think Jacobs is probably the number 2 on my list, and then followed by Henry. I mean, the Swift thing for me, yeah, he looked great at times. Tyson, he was healthy for like the first time in his career.
Yes.
Is that going to happen? You know what I mean? Like, he's proven that his body can't handle a full workload. It happened in his contract year with the Eagles. I don't know if it's going to happen again. That's the issue.
Yeah, I know. I'm all the way with you. It's a bit of a bleak. Like there are big names at these skill positions in the free agency pool, but I don't know if there's as many good players as we want to imagine.
I agree. And I think receiver points to it. Calvin Ridley, probably the best. Hollywood Brown, Gabe Davis, Curtis Samuel, Darnell Mooney, KJ Osborne, Odell's out there. Some names, right? But nobody that's game changing, right? Like Ridley, I think is probably the best one available. I mean, I know people love Marquise Hollywood Brown. I just can't talk myself into him, like no matter what. Just not my type of receiver. And then Gabe Davis, sure, he's got the nickname Big Game Gabe, but man, on the other games, it's like, sheesh, is this guy even out there? And so I don't know. This is just not a great class to me.
What is like? This is what I'm hearing about Gabe Davis, at least from like people that I'm listening to. Like, what is he going to look like in the new offenses? If he looked like that with Josh Allen, then what are we doing? Kind of
right.
Projecting that he's going to look better with Deshaun Watson or something like this. He was in the best situation possible for him. That's who he is. And I think that's kind of the thing about this whole receiver class. Like this little blurb I have in front of me right here from Marquise Brown says, I believe deep speed is hard to find. Did you watch a combine?
Yeah, dude. I like a guy who can catch the football when they're open. Yeah, I mean, that's just me, right? Like,
if you're really fast and you can't track the ball, doesn't matter.
Michael Thomas taking a chance?
Oh, dude, I like Tyler Boyd. Like, he's getting shoved down these lists, but I think he's a better player than a lot of the guys that had. Like, he's a better player right now than Odell Beckham Jr. is, and the only reason Odell's higher than him on these lists is because when Odell's higher, you're going to get your article clicked on.
How about Tyron Smith hitting free agency from the Cowboys? 33 years old. It feels like he's older than that, probably because all the wear and tear on his body, but that's a big name out there.
It is. I think this tackle class is actually pretty good. Trent Brown's a good player. Jonah Williams has his own problems, but he's also 26 years old, and he just switched from left tackle to right tackle, and that's showing you that positional versatility that all these teams love. He might not be the $100 million man that we kind of thought he was going to be when he came in the league, but yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 pretty good offensive tackles in this class. And Brad, for the first time in a long time, not all of them are 40 years old.
I know that's the thing too, right? Like Jonah Williams, maybe in his second life, like maybe he can go somewhere and it's just Cincinnati, right? Like that's the issue with the offensive line, and he goes and he's actually good for somebody else. I'll be curious to see if any of these guys stick. I mean, Andres Pete was a big name for a while, but injury concerns with him. I just don't know how much he has left in the tank. And then on the interior side of things, Tyson, just some names: Kevin Dotson, Connor Williams, Jonah Jackson, Kevin Zeitler, but really nobody that sticks out on that front to me.
Well, it's important to note that it's almost impossible to find plus starters on the offensive line in the free agency pool. It's really hard to find starters in general. So a lot of these guys might come in fighting for jobs. Like there are, good players like we mentioned, but Robert Hunt he's a good player, but is he starting on all 32 teams? Probably not.
Let's get into the edge rushing class, because not only is there a good class in the draft coming out, in my opinion, there's some guys on the market that I think are solid. I mean, Danielle Hunter's the biggest name. Jonathan Greenard, who had 12.5 sacks last year with the Houston Texans. Bryce Huff, from the Jets, Chase Young. I mean, that's everybody's darling. I mean, I can't believe people don't have him number one on the list here. I mean, my God, that guy could do no wrong in people's eyes. But Andrew Van Ginkel, geez, man, talk about a resurgent year or a breakout year with the Dolphins. And then you got some other names, Marcus Davenport, Shaq Barrett. I think he's over his prime, but Josh Uche. What do you think about this class? It's interesting to see edge rushing hit the market like this.
It's pretty juiced. And I think that Danielle Hunter, unfortunately, the dude's 29 and it kind of has played his career in the shadows, so to speak, in Minnesota. Like, talk about somebody who just is, it doesn't matter what scheme you put him in, he's getting you 15 sacks. Like, he's unreal, the way that he can kind of play. I'm super, super interested in what happens with Bryce Huff, because there are times where this guy looks like, oh, that's the next one. Like, it finally clicked. He looks like the guy he's supposed to be. And then the Jets draft deep edge rushers and they sign edge rushers and they don't trust him to play every down. And we don't totally know kind of who he is. But I think if he lands in the right scheme, this might be the steal of the whole thing, because he's 26. And like, some of these guys are 29, 30 years old. And that's the time when NFL GMs start looking around and, holding their nose when they have to hand you the pen.
Chris Jones and Christian Wilkins are on the open market. Now, I think the Chiefs are probably going to re-sign Chris Jones. So that's one of the reasons why they cut MVS, keep cap flexibility, and they tag L'Jarius Sneed. Christian Wilkins hitting the open market, I think, is huge on the interior. And then beyond that, Leonard Williams at age 30. I mean, he's a run stopper. The Seahawks traded for him. Didn't quite go as well. DJ Reader, D'Amico Autry. There's some guys in here, too.
It feels like a 2010s all-decade team. Once you get past like the top 3 or 4, it's like a bunch of dudes that, we've been hearing Fletcher Cox and D'Amico Autry and these names for so long. I think that the top 2 are the top 2 for a reason. Christian Wilkins is kind of, gets jumped or lumped in with the rest of them. Like, when you talk about Miami being soft, it's the whole team. And so then that means it's Christian Wilkins. This dude is special. He's a great player. Chris Jones just was probably the biggest play in the Super Bowl that kind of goes under the radar, forcing Brock Purdy off his spot there, forcing the incompletion. Chiefs go down and win the game. I don't expect a lot of these dudes to be switching teams, to be completely honest with you. Like, Leonard Williams would be where I'd start. And this isn't like new for Leonard Williams switching teams, right? This would be his 4th one if he was on a new team next season. But again, it's a pick your poison kind of deal. Do you want a pass rushing defensive tackle? Do you want a run stopper?
And along those lines, Tyson, the linebacker, Frankie Louvu, Patrick Queen, Jordan Brooks, Levante David, he's the veteran of the group. I don't know how much he has left. I mean, if you're looking for a platoon guy, sure. But Azeez Al-Shaair from the Titans, who was part of the 49ers defense for a long time, Drew Tranquil, Devin White, Willie Gay Jr. There's some names in this one as well. Now, what concerns me is teams watch these guys all year throughout their career, and they're like, yeah, we'll let them go. We don't want to offer them. So yeah, the names sound great when they're hitting the open market, but we've seen, linebackers are kind of getting a little bit similar to running back, where it's like you have a great first contract, and after that, you're really scraping by.
I think Frankie Louvu is a really, really good player. He's the only one when you're watching Panthers games where you can kind of identify who he is, because he looks like he's good at football, and that's something they don't have a ton of. Patrick Queen, almost like out of Baltimore, like borderline. Like, he almost got the Devin White treatment, right? And then Mike McDonald shows up to get Roquan Smith, and it was kind of like, okay, now I can run. Like, you're letting me go, and kind of showed what he can do. This is a really good class of free agent linebackers. I think it just is one with, there's so many different opinions on these guys. Like, I'm a huge Jordan Brooks fan. I don't know a ton of other huge Jordan Brooks fans. I know people that think he sucks. I know the people that think he's perfectly fine and people that think he's above average. And that's kind of going to be all of them. But again, like, this is a draft class coming in with like no real top end linebacker. And so I think some of these guys might end up getting paid because this cap is going. So one of these guys is getting Mozgoved. I don't know if it's in the linebacker department or where, but somebody is going to sign a contract on day one that leaves all of us kind of scratching our head.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was any of the top 3, Louvu, Queen, or Brooks. I think there's going to be people looking for linebacker. I mean, we've seen it, man. You got to cover tight end. You've got to cover the middle field, then you got to stop and get downhill. And I think some of these guys can do that. Be curious to see who sets the market. curious to see where they end up. And let's close here with the cornerbacks and the safeties, Tyson. I don't think it's a good cornerback class for who's available. I mean, anytime that Kendall Fuller and Stephon Gilmore are 1 and 2 on this NFL.com list, you're in trouble. And so you kind of go through that. All right, whatever. And safety is interesting. I think CJ Gardner-Johnson is the best available probably in the secondary. And Xavier McKinney, he's an interesting guy to me because, how much of it was the Giants just stink and he was in a bad situation, and how much of it is like maybe he was not as good as we thought, but because I think in a new spot, he could actually be really good. And the close on this for me, Julian Blackmon and Jeremy Chin, safeties that are available, super intriguing to me as well.
I think Jeremy Chin is the one to me that this could decide the rest of his career and kind of how he's remembered, because 2 years ago it was like, oh my God, this dude's redefining the way we think about the way that safeties should play. And then it was Jaro Evero, their defensive coordinator in Carolina. It's not really a scheme where the linebacker skill set of a safety is valued the way that other teams might. So I think he's liable to end up in a pretty good spot. And then I want to see if Geno Stone can play. This is a guy that has been super, super good in Baltimore and kind of flies under the radar. What did he lead the league in interceptions? Or Bland might have led the league, but he was close. He had 6 or 7 of them this year. But I don't know if that's Kyle Hamilton's on that side of the field, so they're going to throw it over here, or if I can play for real.
Yeah, I think there's some guys in the secondary that we're Eagles fans. We're looking for secondary help. I don't know how much these guys are going to demand contract-wise. I mean, I think all of them have questions, really. I mean, it's not like they're surefire guys. When we look at the edge rushers or when we look at the defensive tackles at the top 3 spots, there's all these guys you can kind of look at and say, well, I kind of have to talk myself into them a little bit. The upside's high, but I'm not quite sure. And so I think there's plenty of guys who are in free agency early on that you can add a top-end guy, go into the draft, after the draft, whatever the case may be, and upgrade your roster.
Well, some of these dudes are still living off the hype of when they got drafted, and then we're trying to figure out, are they good or not? Yeah, I mean, it's over. It's all over the list, really. 26 and under, if you're hitting the open market, it's half as much about your ability to play, and the other half is how you fit in with that team. So it's trying to figure out if they just liked you and you sucked, or if they hated you and you could play.
Okay, well, that's going to do it, man. Any closing thoughts we have, whether it's free agency or the tags or anything else?
Well, you're not going to give Ka'imir Fairbairn any shout here. I mean, kicks matter, dude. Making field goals matters.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
He's the only kicker that I know that's a free agent. So, if there's another one out there and I offended you, I'm sorry.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Like, subscribe, and share the show. Stay connected with us on socials at ISWIS_pod. Tyson and I will be back next week. We're going to start talking some hoops. We've been teasing it. We've been promising it, but we got conference previews that we're going to do for the major conference tournaments. So get ready for that. And then we're going to keep talking NFL draft. Free agency is right around the corner. Seriously. I mean, the legal tampering period starts on Monday. So we're going to have this entire weekend to sit back. And then on Monday, it's going to be starting. Free agency starts on Wednesday. So we'll have you covered on that front. So we'll talk to you all then, guys. Have a good weekend. Peace.